Hey there, folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixskin, your home for tales of the Old West. We're gonna spin you a yarn about lonesome cowboys, unforgiving landscapes, and the hard choices men faced in 1874. So saddle up, settle in, and before we get started, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of our Western adventures. Where are you listening from? Tell me in the comments. A lonesome cowboy, scarred by loss, rides through the frozen New Mexico plains. His heart, as cold as the wind that bites his skin. Jacob Harlo, once a mercenary, carries a wound no blade could carve. The memory of a family stolen by violence. It eats at him constantly, a relentless ache that echoes in the silence of the plains. He rides not towards a destination, but away from the ghosts that haunt his every step. Can a man haunted by loss ever truly find peace? What happens when his past collides with the chance for a future he never expected? When a desperate cry pierces the silence, he's drawn into a moment that could redefine his life. Will this haunted man find redemption in the unlikeliest of encounters? Or will the ghosts of his past claim another home? That's what we'll be looking at today. This story is unfolding in a world where survival is a daily battle and where trust is as valuable as gold. Jacob finds himself at a crossroads, a moment that could either break him further or offer him a glimmer of light in the darkness. Has your past led you to an unexpected encounter? The biting New Mexico winter of 1874. The New Mexico sky, a slab of gray iron over the grasslands. Jacob Harlo rode slowly, his shadow dragging long across the thin snow, the creak of saddle leather, a lonely hymn in the stillness. Once a mercenary, he was now just a cowboy, hollowed out by loss. Now, Jacob doesn't travel the landscape alone. It's his constant company through the frozen wasteland, and as he wanders, the world weighs heavy on his weary shoulders. Wife and daughter taken in a night of blood and screams he couldn't outrun. His hands, rough as rawhide, gripped the reins, but his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the horizon for something he couldn't name. The wind carried pine and frost, stinging his weathered face, but it was the land's quiet that gnawed at him. Ever feel that kind of quiet creeping over you? That creeping dread that knows something terrible will happen. This is what Harlo feels. A quiet that could turn treacherous in a heartbeat. A sound sliced through the cold, thin and high, like a thread snapping in the wind. Jacob froze, his horse snorting clouds of steam. Another cry came, weaker, human. His pulse quickened, not with fear, but with something older, raw. A memory of his little girl's voice, calling for him in the dark. Subscribe now to uncover the journey and share in the comments where you're listening from. What will happen with these cries? He swung down from the saddle, boots crunching frost, and grabbed his rifle from its scabbard. The canyon ahead, a narrow gash in the earth, swallowed the sound. He moved fast. Low. The weight of his past, heavier than the iron in his hand. Between jagged rocks and stunted junipers, he saw them. Two Apache girls no older than 7, pressed against a stone outcrop. Their breath fogged the air, eyes wide with terror. A puma crouched 10 paces off, its eyes glinting like wet flint, muscles coiled under tawny fur. The older girl, her dark braid frayed, shielded the younger, her small body a frail barricade. Jacob's chest tightened. He saw his daughter again, her tiny hands clutching her mother as raider torches lit the night. The memory burned, but he shoved it down. No time for ghosts. He didn't shout. Where does his heart lead him? A loud voice could spook the girls or prod the beast to lunge. Instead, he stepped forward, deliberate, eyes locked on the puma's. Its growl rumbled low, a warning carved in hunger. Jacob raised the rifle, steady as stone, his breath shallow. The shot cracked, splitting the canyon silence. As the bullet sings through the air, has Jacob found his new purpose? The puma jerked, blood blooming on its flank, and collapsed, its final snarl steaming in the cold. The girls flinched, their eyes darting from the dead beast to the stranger with the gun. Jacob lowered the rifle, crouching to seem less like a threat. "You're safe now," he said, voice low, like calming a spooked colt. They didn't move, but their breathing slowed. The older girl's grip on her sister easing just a fraction. He pulled his canteen, offering it. The older girl hesitated, then took it, letting the younger drink first. Water spilled down the little one's chin, her hands trembling. Their clothes, deerskin tunics and leggings, were torn, smudged with dirt. Their faces gaunt from hunger or fear or both. Subscribe right now to see where this all leads. It's time to find out. Jacob shrugged off his coat, heavy with the scent of leather and smoke, and draped it over them. The older girl clutched it tight, her chin lifting in defiance, as if daring him to take it back. He almost smiled at that fire, but the wind was turning sharper, biting through his shirt. "Do you think there is a relationship between the two girls and his daughter?" His cabin wasn't far, a half-mile west, where the sweet grass gave way to scrub oak. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the trail. They followed, silent, the younger girl's hand brushing his sleeve, clinging like she feared the wind might steal him away. The canyon's walls loomed as they walked, the girl's footsteps light, but leaving faint marks in the frost. Don't forget to tell me where you are listening to this story from in the comments. Jacob kept his rifle ready, eyes scanning for more threats. Beasts or men, the frontier didn't care which. His mind drifted unbidden to the night he'd failed his family. The night he'd come home to ash and silence. These girls weren't his, but their fear was a mirror reflecting a debt he could never pay. He shook it off, focusing on the path. Do you think Jacob will be able to protect the young girls? The cabin's chimney came into view, a faint thread of smoke curling against the sky. Inside, warmth would wait, and maybe something more. Something he hadn't felt since the world broke him. By the way, if this tale's gripping you, hit that subscribe button to ride along with us. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how far these frontier stories travel. What happens when these girls reach the cabin and what shadows follow them? Stay with me because this is just the start. The door creaked as he pushed it open. The air inside thick with wood smoke and the faint tang of old coffee. He guided the girls to the hearth where embers glowed like dying stars. They crouched close, hands outstretched, their eyes mapping the room's corners, searching for safety or an exit. Jacob couldn't tell. He set a pot of beans on the fire, the sizzle cutting the quiet. The older girl ate fast, not looking up, while the younger took small bites, her gaze flicking to him, weary yet curious. Outside, snow began to fall, soft as whispers, cloaking the world in white. Jacob sat with his boot stretched toward the fire, watching the embers pulse like a heartbeat, their glow sending shadows dancing across the rough-hewn walls of his cabin. Beyond the door, the New Mexico night pressed close, the snowfall thickening until it seemed to hush the world itself. He wondered in that silence what he had just begun. Jacob leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight, his eyes tracing the two Apache girls huddled by the fire, their small forms wrapped in his coat, seemed to shrink the room, filling its emptiness with something he couldn't yet name. The older girl, Awi, sat cross-legged, her gaze fixed on the flames, while Tiva, the younger, curled against her sister, clutching a corner of the wool like a lifeline. Jacob rose, his boots scuffing the warped floorboards, and stirred the pot of beans simmering over the fire. The air grew heavy with the scent of roasted pinto and wood smoke, a faint comfort against the cold seeping through the cabin's gaps. Hit the like button, and subscribe for more Western stories. He ladled the beans into 2 tin bowls, adding hunks of stale cornbread from a shelf. Awi took the offering with a nod, her movements precise, like she was measuring trust with every gesture. T hesitated, her eyes flicking to Jacob, then to the food before she scooped a small bite, chewing slowly as if savoring safety itself. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. He watched them eat, their silence louder than words, and felt the ghost of his own daughter in the room, her laughter, her small hands tugging his sleeve. He turned away, jaw tight, and poured coffee into a chipped mug, the bitter steam grounding him. The cabin was a lean thing, built by hands that knew hardship more than craft. A single room, its walls scarred from years of wind and neglect, held a table, a cot, and a chair where his wife once sat, now empty, save for dust. The firelight played tricks, making that chair seem less a relic and more a promise of something lost. Jacob shook the thought loose. These girls weren't his to keep, but the frontier didn't care for sentiment. It demanded action. Now that you've heard this story about the plains, tell me, what do you think happens next? He knelt by the hearth, adding a log, the sparks snapping like distant gunfire. Awi's eyes followed him, sharp and unyielding, as if mapping his soul for threats or kindness. You got names? He asked, voice rough but soft, like gravel smoothed by a stream. Awi met his gaze, her chin lifting. Awi, she said, then nodded to her sister. T. Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened around the bowl, betraying a fear she wouldn't speak. Jacob nodded, committing the names to memory. He didn't push for more. Words were scarce out here, and trust was rarer still. Instead, he pulled a buffalo hide from the cot and spread it near the fire, motioning for them to rest. Make sure to subscribe for more and hit the like button. T crawled onto it, her small frame sinking into the fur, while Awi stayed upright, a sentinel in the flickering light. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the door's loose hinges. Jacob checked the latch, his hand lingering on the wood, senses tuned to the night. The frontier was never still. Coyotes, bandits, or worse, could be waiting beyond the snow. He glanced at the girls, their faces softened by the fire's glow, and felt a tug in his chest. A debt older than the one he owed his past. He'd failed his family once, left them to raiders while he rode for coin. These girls, though, were here breathing. Their small lives a weight he couldn't walk away from. If this story is pulling you in, folks, hit that subscribe button to keep up with Jacob's journey. Drop a comment with your city or country. Love knowing where these tales find you. What's waiting for these girls beyond the cabin door? Stick around to see how deep this trail runs. The fire popped, sending a spark skittering across the floor. Awi stamped it out with her foot, quick and sure, her eyes meeting Jacob's with a flicker of defiance. He nodded, respect kindling in him. She was no stranger to survival. That much was clear. He sat again, the chair groaning, and sipped his coffee, its bitterness a mirror to his thoughts. The girls ate in silence, but their presence shifted the cabin's air. It wasn't just warmth now. Let me know your thoughts about the story in the comments. It was something alive, fragile, like the first green shoot after a prairie fire. T yawned, her head drooping against Awi's shoulder. And Jacob felt the room's edges soften, the silence less like a grave and more like a pause before dawn. He stood, crossing to a shelf where a small wooden horse carved for a child long gone, sat dust-covered. He handed it to T, who traced its lines with a finger, her eyes wide with wonder. Awi watched, her guard lowering just a fraction. Jacob turned back to the fire, his shadow long against the wall. The night was young, and the snow kept falling, sealing them in. Whatever came next, be it man, beast, or memory, Jacob knew one thing. Within these rough-hewn walls, he would make his stand. Come what may. By dawn, the storm had quieted, leaving the New Mexico plains muted under a gray sky. Jacob stood at the window, coffee mug cold in his hand, watching the world blur into a white veil. Behind him, the fire's last coals glowed faintly, while the girls, Awi and Tiva, slept in the hush of its fading warmth. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more Western stories. Their soft breaths mingled with the crackle of embers, a reminder of the life he'd pulled from the canyon's jaws. But the frontier never let peace linger long, and Jacob's gut told him the quiet was a liar. Hoofbeats thudded, faint at first, then sharp, cutting through the morning's hush. He set the mug down, hand drifting to the rifle by the door. A lone rider emerged from the snow, a figure draped in a faded red blanket, hair braided with a single hawk feather catching the wind. The girl stirred, Awi's eyes snapping open, alert as a deer's. Jacob stepped onto the porch, the cold biting his knuckles, and watched the rider dismount with a grace that spoke of open trails and hard survival. You are just a click away from finding out what happens in the next episode when you subscribe. She was Apache, her face etched with lines of grief and grit, eyes sharp as obsidian. She called out in a tongue Jacob didn't know, her voice a low song that pulled the girls from the cabin like a tide. Awi and T ran, their bare feet sinking into the snow, and the woman dropped to her knees, arms wrapping them tight. Her shoulders shook, but her face stayed fierce, a mother carved from stone and sorrow. Jacob stood back, the wind stinging his cheeks, feeling like an intruder on a moment too raw for witnessing. The woman rose, her daughters clinging to her sides, and fixed Jacob with a look that weighed him whole. I am Nalin, she said, her English halting but clear. They are mine. You've saved them. Her pause was heavy, like she was sifting through debts older than words. A life saved must be repaid. I come with my life. Jacob's throat tightened. He saw his wife in her resolve. His daughter and the girl's small hands clutching their mother. He shook his head. The plains provide a harsh environment. What do you think the future holds for these two people? You don't owe me. Take them and go. But Nalin's eyes didn't waver. My people see me as a ghost. Husband dead, kin scattered. Here, I am still a mother. Her words cut deeper than the wind, slicing into the guilt Jacob carried for failing his own family. Where do you see this story going with Nalin's entry? He wanted to argue to send her back to a world that might still claim her. But the girl's laughter, soft and sudden, stopped him. Awi tossed a snowball at T, who squealed, the sound warming the frozen air. Nalin's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile, and Jacob felt the cabin behind him shift. Not just a shelter now, but a stake in something bigger. If this tale's got you hooked, hit that subscribe button to ride with us through the frontier. Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see where these stories land. What's Nalin's next move and what's Shadow's trailer? Stay tuned because the storm's just beginning. Nalin stepped inside, her presence filling the cabin like smoke. She moved with purpose, stirring the fire, her hands steady despite the weight of her offer. Jacob watched, torn between the urge to push her away, and the pull of something he hadn't felt in years. Connection fragile as a spider's thread. She knelt by the girls, brushing snow from Tyva's hair. Her fingers gentle but calloused, hands that knew work and loss. A wife handed her mother a piece of cornbread, her defiance softened by trust. Jacob busied himself with the fire, avoiding Nalin's gaze, but her words echoed. I am still a mother. They were a mirror to his own failure and yet a chance to mend something broken. The day passed in small acts. Nalin mended a tear in a wise tunic, her needle flashing in the firelight. Have you subscribed for more? Don't forget to like and share. Tyva played with the wooden horse, her giggles a quiet rebellion against the cold. Jacob chopped wood outside, the axe's rhythm steadying his thoughts. But the snow kept falling, thick and relentless, sealing the cabin in a white cocoon. He glanced at Nalin through the window, her silhouette framed by the hearth, and felt a shift in his chest. A spark of purpose, or maybe just the weight of a choice he couldn't unmake. Make sure to let me know where you are listening from in the comments. As night fell, the wind grew teeth howling through the pines. Jacob checked the door's latch, his rifle close. Nalin sat by the girls, humming a low Apache tune, its cadence weaving through the cabin's cracks. The sound wasn't his to claim, but it settled over him like dust after a stampede. He sat, the chair creaking, and watched the fire light paint Nalin's face in gold. The girls slept, curled together on the buffalo hide, their breaths a soft rhythm. Jacob didn't speak, but his mind churned. Nalin wasn't simply repaying a debt. She was stitching together something broken, and against all odds, she had drawn him into its fabric. The fire sank low, its glow fading to embers. Jacob sat listening to the Apache lullaby still lingering in the rafters, the melody twining with the soft breaths of Awi and Tia asleep on the buffalo hide. Outside, the wind clawed at the walls. But inside, the hush was no longer emptiness. It was the weight of a fragile newborn home. But peace was a guest that never stayed long in the New Mexico wilds of 1874, and Jacob's instincts, honed by years of blood and betrayal, prickled with warning. Dust swirled in the gray light of late afternoon, 3 days after Nalin's arrival. As hoof beats pounded the frozen earth, Jacob was outside splitting wood, the axe's bite ringing sharp against the snow-draped pines. "Have you hit the subscribe button? What are you waiting for?" He froze, head tilting to catch the sound. 3 riders moving fast. His rifle leaned against the porch, a long shadow in the slanting sun. Nalin appeared at the door, her eyes narrowing, one hand gripping the frame, the other hovering near a knife tucked at her waist. Awi and T peered from behind her, their faces tight with a fear that needed no words. The riders reined up, their horses snorting steam, coats flecked with snow. Jacob recognized them. Cole, Barrett, and Amos, men from his mercenary days, their faces hard as the flint in their eyes. They'd ridden with him once, shared whiskey and lies, but left his family to burn when raiders came. Now they sat tall, hands resting on pistols, their gazes crawling over Nalin and the girls like wolves, sizing up prey. "Harlo," Cole spat, his voice thick with scorn. "Heard you're keeping savages. Town doesn't take kindly to that." Jacob's jaw tightened, his grip on the axe firm. "My land, my business," he said, voice low, a warning wrapped in calm. Barrett smirked, leaning forward. "They don't belong here. Share this with your friends. Hand them over or we'll take them." The air grew heavy, the winds bite sharper, as if the land itself sensed blood. Nalin stepped forward, her chin high, eyes blazing. "We go nowhere," she said. Her English clipped but fierce, a mother's steel in every syllable. "Tell me in the comments, how do you think this will all play out?" Awi clutched her mother's hand, but her other fist balled tight, ready to fight. Jacob moved between them and the riders, axe still in hand, its weight a promise. "You want them? You'll go through me." His voice was steady, but his heart thumped, not with fear, but with the ghosts of his past. His wife's screams, his daughter's pleas unanswered. He wouldn't fail again. Amos, the youngest, shifted in his saddle, hand twitching toward his gun. "Don't be a fool, Harlo. They ain't worth dying for." The first shot came fast, a crack that split the dusk. Amos' pistol flashed, but Jacob was faster, dropping the axe and diving for his rifle. He rolled, snow stinging his face and fired. The bullet caught Amos in the chest, his body slumping as his horse reared. Cole drew, but Nalin was a blur, her knife slicing the air, catching his arm. Blood sprayed red against the white ground, and he cursed, dropping his gun. Barrett charged, spurring his horse toward the cabin, but a wade darted out, hurling a rock that struck his temple. "Did you tell your friends and family to subscribe?" He swayed, stunned, giving Jacob time to fire again. The shot took Barrett's shoulder, and he fell, rolling into the snow. Nalin grabbed T, pulling her inside, while Awi scooped up Cole's fallen pistol, her small hands trembling but steady. Jacob stood, rifle trained on Barrett, who groaned, clutching his wound. "Do you think that was the right thing to do?" Cole, bloodied, raised his hands, his fight gone. "Enough," Jacob growled, his breath clouding the air. "Get out, or you're next." The 2 men staggered to their horses, leaving Amos' body in the snow. Jacob watched them ride off, the dusk swallowing their shapes, the wind carrying their curses away. And don't forget to drop your city and state in the comments. He turned to Nalin, her knife still drawn, her eyes fierce, but searching his. AI handed him a strip of cloth torn from her tunic, her fingers brushing his, a silent trust. Tuva clung to her mother, her face buried in Nalin's blanket. Jacob knelt, checking the girls for harm, his hands steady despite the blood pounding in his ears. The cabin stood untouched, its walls a defiant stand against the cold. He dragged Amos's body to the pines, digging a shallow grave in the frozen earth. Atop it, he placed a stone, scratching an Apache symbol. Nolan showed him, a mark of passage, not forgiveness. Night fell, the snow heavier now, blanketing the violence. Jacob returned to the cabin, his boots leaving dark prints. Nalin stood by the door, her knife sheath, her gaze stayed unreadable. The girls sat by the fire, Awi whispering to T, their hands linked. Jacob's chest ached, not from wounds, but from the sharp truth that his fight had bought them another chance at tomorrow. The wind howled outside, yet within the cabin breathed steady, as if holding that promise through the dark. At dawn, pale light crept over the New Mexico plains, seeping through the pines and washing the snow in muted silver. Jacob Harlo stepped into the brittle air, his breath rising in ghostly plumes. Behind him, laughter stirred faintly within the cabin, fragile, but real. And for the first time in years, he let the weight on his shoulders ease. The graves he dug lay hidden under fresh snow. But their presence lingered, a quiet marker of a past he'd buried alongside them. Inside, the cabin held a new kind of stillness. Not the hollow silence of loss, but something warmer. Stitched together by the lives now bound to his own. He pushed the door open, the hinges groaning, and found Nalin by the hearth, tending a small fire. Do you think Jacob made the right choice? Awi and T sat on the buffalo hide, their fingers weaving patterns with river pebbles in a game only they understood. The air smelled of sage and cornbread. Nalin's touch already weaving into the cabin's bones. She glanced up, her eyes steady, carrying a strength that didn't need words. Jacob nodded, his boots scuffing the floor as he hung his rifle by the door. I want to hear your opinions on Jacob. The fight with his old comrades had settled one debt, but it had opened another. A promise to protect this fragile refuge, no matter the cost. Nalin rose, brushing her hands on her skirt, and handed him a tin mug of coffee. Its steam curling like a ghost. What did you think about Nalin after her introduction? For strength, she said, her voice low, threaded with a warmth that caught him off guard. He took it, their fingers brushing, the contact brief but heavy, like a stone dropped in still water. Jacob sipped, the bitterness grounding him, and watched as Awi taught T to stack the pebbles into a tiny tower. Their laughter, a soft rebellion against the cold outside. The sound stirred something in him, a memory of his daughter's giggle, but it didn't cut like it used to. It felt like a scar, not a wound. The day unfolded in small, deliberate acts. Nalin swept the floor, her movements sure, as if claiming the space as her own. Jacob repaired a loose board on the porch. The hammer's rhythm a counterpoint to the wind's low moan. A wife followed him outside, her small hands carrying kindling, her eyes tracking his work with a quiet intensity. T stayed close to Nalin, clutching the wooden horse he'd given her, its worn edges smoothed by her touch. The snow kept falling, soft but relentless, sealing the cabin in a world apart. Jacob glanced at the girls, their presence a tether to something he'd thought lost forever. A reason to keep going. By afternoon, the fire burned brighter, its light painting the walls in gold. Nalin knelt by the hearth, grinding corn with a stone, her hands steady, her hum a low thread weaving through the room. Now that you've seen some of the relationships grow and form, I want to know, did you think Nalin was going to be a bad person when she arrived? Jacob sat at the table, oiling his rifle, but his eyes kept drifting to her. She was no ghost, no debt to be paid. She was a force like the land itself, unyielding yet alive. Away joined her mother, mimicking her motions, while T sprawled on the hide, tracing the horse's lines with a finger, whispering stories to it. Jacob's chest tightened, not with grief, but with a quiet ache. A longing for this to last. As dusk fell, the wind softened, the snow settling into a hush. Jacob stepped outside to check the corral, his boots crunching the fresh powder. The plains stretched endlessly, their edges blurred, but the cabin's glow behind him felt like a beacon. He returned to find Nalin mending his shirt, her needle flashing in the firelight, the tear from yesterday's fight stitched tight. She looked up, her gaze meeting his, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared scars, of battles fought side by side. He sat across from her, the chair creaking, and cleared his throat. "Stay," he said, voice low, steady as iron. "Not for what I did. For what we could be." Nolan's hands paused, the needle still, her eyes searching his. She sat the shirt down, her fingers brushing his calloused hand, the warmth of her touch anchoring him to the moment. "For tomorrow," she said, her voice soft but sure, a vow carved in the quiet. Awi and T looked up, their pebble game forgotten, their faces bright with something like hope. The fire crackled, its light spilling over them, turning the cabin's rough walls into a sanctuary. Outside, the snow fell gently. The world hushed. But inside, the silence was alive. Not the emptiness of loss, but the weight of a home reborn. Jacob leaned back, his shadow soft against the wall. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. Subscribe now. It's so easy. Jacob's tale of redemption in the snowy New Mexico wilds leaves us with its spark of hope amid the cold. What did you feel as the cabin became a home, as scars turned to promises? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Did Jacob stand against his past stir you, or was it null and strength that lingered? Share where you're listening from. I'm eager to know how far this story traveled. Your reflections keep these frontier tales alive. I'm grateful for your joining me on this journey. Until the next story pulls us back to the wilds, keep the fire burning. See you soon. And don't forget to subscribe.